The entire ballroom watched people turn away from the woman in the wheelchair, but one struggling single father walked across the floor and asked her to dance as if she were the only person in the room. He had no idea that by the end of the night, that simple act of kindness would change both of their lives forever. Ethan Walker tightened the cuffs of his borrowed dress shirt and glanced at his reflection in the community center restroom mirror. The shirt was a little too large, but it would do. His 10-year-old daughter, Lily, had convinced him to attend the annual charity gala hosted at the town civic hall. She had spent weeks selling raffle tickets through her school fundraiser, and tonight she was excited to see the event in person. Ethan rarely attended social gatherings. Most evenings were spent helping Lily with homework, paying bills, or trying to stretch every dollar a little further. Earlier that afternoon, he had stared at an overdue utility bill sitting on the kitchen counter beside a half-empty coffee mug. The numbers worried him, but worry never changed anything. Responsibility did. So he had paid what he could and moved on with his day. Now, standing inside the brightly lit civic hall, he focused on Lily's happiness instead of his own concerns. The ballroom buzzed with conversation. Local business owners, donors, school administrators, and community leaders filled the room beneath crystal chandeliers. A jazz band played softly near the stage. Through the tall windows, Ethan could see rows of pickup trucks and sedans parked outside beneath the cool autumn sky. Lily smiled as she greeted friends from school. Ethan stayed close, content to remain in the background. He had always preferred listening over being noticed. Across the room, however, someone caught his attention. A woman sat alone near the edge of the dance floor in a wheelchair. She wore an elegant navy dress, and her posture carried quiet confidence despite the isolation surrounding her. People acknowledged her politely when passing by, but none stayed. Some offered awkward smiles. Others simply looked away. Ethan noticed something else. Every time a slow song began, couples stepped onto the dance floor while she remained alone. There was no bitterness on her face, only a familiar kind of loneliness, the kind that comes from being present but unseen. Ethan recognized it because he had felt it himself after losing his wife years earlier. During a break between songs, Lily tugged gently on his sleeve. "Dad," she whispered, "why is that lady sitting by herself?" Ethan followed her gaze. "I do not know." Lily frowned. She looked sad. Ethan looked again. The woman had turned her attention toward the dancers, her expression thoughtful rather than jealous. For several seconds, he remained silent. Then he smiled softly at his daughter. Sometimes people need to know they matter. Lily nodded as if the answer made perfect sense. A new song began. The dance floor slowly filled again. Ethan took a breath and walked across the room. Several guests watched curiously. Others barely noticed. The woman looked up as he approached. Her eyes widened slightly. "Excuse me," Ethan said warmly. "I was wondering if you would like to dance." For the first time all evening, genuine surprise appeared on her face. Around them, conversations seemed to fade into the background. The woman searched his expression as though trying to determine whether she had heard him correctly. Then, very slowly, a smile touched her lips. But before she answered, someone standing nearby suddenly stepped forward, their reaction revealing that the woman was not who Ethan believed she was. And within moments, the entire room would learn something he never saw coming. The woman looked up at Ethan, surprise lingering in her eyes, but before she could answer, a sharply dressed man hurried toward them from across the ballroom. "Ms. Bennett, there you are," he said with visible concern. "The board members have been looking for you." A subtle shift moved through the room. Several guests suddenly turned their heads. Conversations softened. Ethan noticed the change, but did not fully understand it. The woman sighed lightly and offered the man a polite smile. "I will be there in a moment." The man nodded and stepped away. Ethan glanced at her. "Sorry if I interrupted something important." A small laugh escaped her. It sounded genuine, as if she had not laughed that way in a while. "Most people interrupt me because they know who I am," she replied. "You seem to be the first person tonight who does not." Ethan shrugged. "I only know that you look like someone who deserved a dance." For a moment, she simply stared at him. Then the smile returned, warmer this time. "My name is Claire Bennett." Ethan introduced himself and gently offered his hand. Several guests nearby watched with curiosity as Claire accepted. They moved onto the edge of the dance floor. Ethan did not treat her wheelchair as an obstacle or a symbol. He treated it as part of the moment, nothing more. As the music played, they talked about ordinary things, small-town life, raising children, favorite places to eat. Claire admitted she occasionally escaped corporate meetings by visiting a quiet diner outside Columbus where nobody recognized her. Ethan laughed and told her about the local diner where the waitress always remembered Lily's favorite pancakes. The simplicity of the conversation felt refreshing to both of them. Across the ballroom, Lily watched proudly from a table beside her school principal. She could see something changing in the woman her father had approached. The loneliness Ethan noticed earlier seemed softer now. Later that evening, after the event ended, Ethan and Lily walked through the parking lot beneath rows of streetlights. Pickup trucks and family SUVs slowly exited onto the main road. Lily slipped her hand into his. She seemed nice. Ethan smiled. She did. Did you know she was important? Ethan opened the passenger door for her. Everyone is important. Lily grinned as if she had expected that answer. Meanwhile, inside a black SUV waiting near the Civic Hall entrance, Claire remained seated long after most guests had left. Through the window, she watched Ethan's truck disappear into the night. For years, people had approached her because of her company, her wealth, or her influence. Tonight, a single father had crossed a crowded ballroom simply because he noticed someone sitting alone. The difference stayed with her. The next morning, Ethan returned to his normal routine. He dropped Lily off at school, watching her disappear into a busy school hallway filled with backpacks and morning chatter. Then he headed toward the construction supply company where he worked. Life still contained overdue bills, responsibilities, and uncertainty. Nothing about his circumstances had changed overnight. Yet shortly before lunch, his phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. "Hello," he answered. The voice on the other end was instantly recognizable. Ethan, this is Claire." He stopped walking. Workers loaded materials nearby while forklifts moved through the warehouse yard. "I hope I am not interrupting," she said. "Not at all." Claire hesitated for a second. "I was wondering if you and Lily might join me for lunch this Saturday." Ethan looked toward the cloudy Ohio sky above the warehouse. Something told him this invitation was about far more than a meal. And as he agreed to meet her, neither of them realized that the conversation waiting ahead would uncover wounds both had spent years trying to hide. Saturday arrived with clear skies and a cool autumn breeze sweeping across Cedar Ridge. Ethan parked his aging pickup truck outside a family-owned diner just off Main Street. The chrome sign above the entrance gleamed in the morning sunlight. Lily practically bounced out of the truck before he had fully turned off the engine. "Do you think she will be there already?" she asked. Ethan smiled. "Probably." Inside, Claire was waiting in a corner booth near the window. Unlike the elegant woman he had met at the gala, she wore a simple sweater and jeans. For the first time, she looked less like a CEO and more like someone trying to enjoy a quiet Saturday. Lily greeted her immediately. Within minutes, the two were discussing school projects and favorite books, while Ethan listened with amusement. Watching them together stirred something unexpected inside Claire. She had spent years attending corporate dinners and charity events. Yet this simple breakfast felt more genuine than most of them. Over pancakes and coffee, the conversation gradually deepened. Claire asked about Ethan's life. He answered honestly, but without self-pity. He spoke about losing his wife 5 years earlier and learning how to be both mother and father to Lily. He described long nights balancing work, parenting, and bills. He mentioned the hospital waiting room where he had spent countless hours during his wife's illness. His voice remained calm, but the memories carried weight. Claire listened quietly. Most people tried to impress her. Ethan simply told the truth. Later, as they left the diner, a small moment revealed even more about him. An elderly man struggled to load groceries into the trunk of his car across the parking lot. Without hesitation, Ethan walked over and helped. He did not make a show of it. He did not expect thanks. He simply noticed someone needed assistance. Claire watched from a distance. The gesture lasted less than 2 minutes, yet it lingered in her thoughts far longer. On the drive home, she found herself replaying dozens of similar moments she had witnessed since meeting him. Kindness seemed to be his default setting, not an occasional decision. The following week brought a new challenge. At work, Ethan learned that overtime hours were being reduced due to budget cuts. The news hit hard. He already stretched every paycheck carefully. That evening, after sorting mail at home, he found another utility bill waiting near the mailbox. He sat quietly at the kitchen table after Lily went to bed, studying the numbers. Concern crossed his face, but not defeat. He began adjusting expenses on a notepad instead. Responsibility first, worry later. Meanwhile, Claire could not stop thinking about the life Ethan had described. One afternoon, she quietly visited the local community center after hearing he volunteered there on weekends. Through a doorway overlooking the church parking lot, she watched him help organize a food drive. He greeted every person with the same respect regardless of age, appearance, or background. Children ran through the gymnasium laughing, while volunteers packed boxes nearby. Ethan moved among them naturally, never seeking attention. Something shifted inside Claire as she observed him. For years, she had measured success through growth charts, acquisitions, and board meetings. Yet standing there, she realized she admired this man more than many executives she had ever hired. Later that evening, her assistant delivered a report she had not requested. It contained background information gathered after the gala. Claire skimmed through the pages casually at first. Then she stopped. Hidden among ordinary details was something unexpected. A decision Ethan had made years earlier during the darkest period of his life. A sacrifice so significant that almost nobody knew about it. And as she stared at the document, Claire realized she had only begun to understand who Ethan Walker truly was. Claire sat alone in her office long after sunset, the city lights of Columbus glowing beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. The report remained open on her desk. She had intended to learn more about Ethan out of curiosity. What she found left her silent. 5 years earlier, during the final months of his wife's illness, Ethan had sold nearly everything of value he owned to cover medical expenses not paid by insurance. The report included another detail that caught her attention. After his wife's passing, a local assistance fund had offered him financial support. Ethan qualified immediately, yet instead of accepting the full amount, he requested that a large portion be redirected to another family whose child required emergency treatment. There was no publicity, no recognition, no social media post. Almost nobody knew it happened. Claire leaned back in her chair and stared at the document. She had spent years surrounded by people who talked about generosity. Ethan had practiced it when it hurt. The following Saturday, she drove to Cedar Ridge without announcing her visit. She found Ethan at the community center helping prepare a seasonal food drive. Volunteers moved between folding tables while boxes of canned goods filled the gymnasium. Outside the church parking lot, families arrived with donations in pickup trucks and family vans. Ethan greeted each person with the same warmth, whether they were donating 1 can or 20. Claire stayed in the background for a while, watching. Eventually, Ethan noticed her and smiled. "You could have called. I thought I would surprise you." Mission accomplished. They spent the afternoon working together. At one point, a nervous teenager accidentally knocked over an entire stack of food boxes. Several volunteers turned toward the noise. The young man looked mortified. Ethan immediately walked over and helped gather the scattered items. "No big deal," he said calmly. "Everybody drops something eventually." The relief on the teenager's face was immediate. Claire watched the exchange closely. Once again, Ethan protected someone's dignity before protecting efficiency. It was becoming a pattern she could not ignore. Later, after most volunteers had left, Claire and Ethan sat on folding chairs near the empty gym. Sunlight filtered through the high windows. The conversation turned more personal than before. Claire admitted that after an accident years ago left her dependent on a wheelchair, many people had stopped seeing her as a complete person. Some treated her like an inspiration. Others treated her like a limitation. Very few treated her normally. Ethan listened quietly. Then he said something simple. "The first thing I noticed about you was that you looked lonely." Claire blinked. "Not the wheelchair?" "No." His answer arrived without hesitation. The honesty in it touched something deep inside her. For a moment, neither spoke. A new understanding settled between them, gentle but undeniable. Yet life rarely allows healing without challenge. That evening, after returning home, Ethan opened his mailbox and found another notice from the utility company. The reduced overtime hours were already creating problems. He carried the envelope inside and placed it beneath a stack of bills on the kitchen counter. Lily was finishing homework at the table, and she needed his attention more than his worries did. Across town, Claire found herself thinking about the conversation long after it ended. She realized she admired Ethan more than she had intended. But the next morning, during a meeting with senior executives, she overheard something that immediately changed her mood. One of her company's upcoming expansion projects would affect businesses throughout Cedar Ridge, including the construction supplier where Ethan worked. And based on what she heard, the consequences could place even more pressure on a man who was already carrying too much. As the meeting continued, Claire felt a knot form in her stomach. Because for the first time since meeting Ethan Walker, she feared that circumstances beyond either of their control might soon test everything they were beginning to build. The news stayed with Claire for days. Every meeting, every report, every presentation seemed overshadowed by a single thought. If the expansion plan moved forward exactly as proposed, the construction supplier where Ethan worked would likely lose a major contract. The company would survive, but layoffs were possible. Reduced hours were almost certain. For most executives, it was a routine business decision. For Claire, it suddenly had a human face. One chilly Tuesday morning, she drove to Cedar Ridge and found Ethan unloading supplies behind the warehouse. Pickup trucks moved in and out of the loading yard while workers prepared orders for local contractors. Ethan greeted her with the same easy warmth he always did. "You look like you have something on your mind," he said. Claire smiled faintly. "Am I that obvious?" Only today. They shared coffee from a nearby diner before Ethan returned to work. Claire almost told him about the project. Almost. But she needed more facts before creating unnecessary worry. As she prepared to leave, she noticed a young employee struggling to repair a damaged pallet jack. Most workers walk past without stopping. Ethan knelt beside him, spent 20 minutes helping solve the problem, then returned to his own responsibilities without expecting recognition. Claire watched quietly from a distance. Even under financial pressure, his instinct remained the same. Help first, complain later. That afternoon brought an unexpected discovery. During another review of community records connected to Cedar Ridge, Claire came across a recommendation letter written years earlier by a physician from the hospital where Ethan's wife had been treated. Curious, she opened it. The letter described how Ethan had spent months volunteering in the hospital waiting room after his wife's death, helping new families navigate paperwork, insurance forms, and support resources. One passage caught her attention. The physician wrote that Ethan often stayed long after visiting hours simply to sit with frightened relatives who had nobody else. Claire stared at the words. He had transformed his own grief into service. The realization struck deeper than anything she had learned before. That evening, she invited Ethan and Lily to a small community fundraiser held near the church parking lot. Children played carnival games while local families gathered beneath strings of lights. Lily disappeared almost immediately with friends from school. Ethan and Claire found themselves walking slowly along the edge of the event. The conversation turned personal again. Claire finally shared more about the accident that changed her life. She admitted that losing mobility had not been the hardest part. The hardest part was losing the version of herself people used to see. Ethan listened carefully. Then he said, "You know what I see?" Claire looked at him. "What?" "Someone who keeps showing up for other people even after life gave her reasons not to." The words hit her harder than she expected. For years, people had praised her resilience. Ethan was the first person who seemed to understand the cost behind it. A quiet silence followed. Not awkward, meaningful. Something shifted between them. A wall that had existed since the gala began to disappear. Yet as the evening drew to a close, another surprise arrived. Claire's phone buzzed with an urgent message from one of her senior executives. The expansion project had moved faster than expected. Final recommendations would be presented to the board within days. Worse, the report specifically identified Ethan's employer as one of the businesses most likely to be affected. Claire felt her stomach tighten. For the first time, she understood that the challenge approaching Ethan was no longer theoretical. It was real, and as she watched him laugh with Lily beneath the community lights, she realized something else. The man who had changed her life without even trying was about to face a storm he never saw coming. Whether she could protect him from it without compromising the values he lived by remained a question neither of them was prepared to answer. The board meeting took place on a rainy Thursday morning, and for the first time in years, Claire found herself fighting for something that would never appear on a balance sheet. Senior executives filled the conference room while charts, forecasts, and projections glowed across large presentation screens. The recommendation was simple. Move forward with the expansion plan exactly as designed. Increase efficiency. Reduce costs. Accept that several smaller suppliers would lose contracts in the process. Among those suppliers was the company where Ethan worked. Claire listened carefully before speaking. Then she asked a question nobody expected. Have any of us actually visited the communities affected by these decisions? The room fell silent. Numbers were easy. People were more complicated. Later that afternoon, while executives continued debating strategy, Ethan was unloading materials at the warehouse under gray skies. He knew nothing about the discussions happening miles away. His attention remained focused on the work in front of him. When a coworker received a phone call about a family emergency, Ethan immediately volunteered to finish the man's deliveries even though it meant a longer day. It was the kind of decision nobody would remember by next week. It was exactly the kind of choice that defined him. By the time he climbed into his pickup truck that evening, exhaustion tugged at his shoulders. Still, he stopped at a grocery store on the way home because Lily needed supplies for a school project. Responsibility always came first. The next morning brought another challenge. A notice from the utility company arrived in the mailbox. Ethan stared at it briefly while standing on the front porch. The reduced overtime hours were beginning to show. For a moment, concern crossed his face. Then he folded the paper, slipped it into his jacket pocket, and headed inside to help Lily prepare for school. Later, after dropping her off and watching her disappear into a busy school hallway, he drove to the community center for a volunteer planning meeting. There he found Claire waiting unexpectedly. Something seemed different about her. More serious, more thoughtful. They spent the morning organizing a holiday outreach program for local families. At one point, an elderly volunteer struggled to carry several boxes toward the storage room. Before anyone else noticed, Ethan quietly stepped forward and helped. Claire watched him from across the room. She had seen dozens of similar moments by now. They never appeared calculated. He simply moved toward people who needed help. Eventually, after the meeting ended and volunteers drifted away, Claire asked if they could talk. They sat outside near the church parking lot while autumn leaves rolled across the pavement. For several seconds, she searched for the right words. Then she told him the truth. Not every detail, but enough. She explained that a major business decision under review could affect several local employers, including his. Ethan listened quietly. Are you telling me my job is in danger? He asked. Claire hesitated. I am telling you I'm trying to prevent that from happening. Ethan nodded slowly. Surprisingly, he did not appear angry. You do not control everything, he said. No, Claire admitted, but I wish I did. The answer revealed more vulnerability than she intended. For a moment, neither looked away. Something important passed between them. Trust. Not complete trust, but deeper than before. Yet even as the conversation ended, another development was already unfolding. That evening, one of Claire's executives sent her a confidential report. It contained a proposal that would protect profits while sacrificing several small communities, including Cedar Ridge. Worse, the board seemed ready to approve it. Claire stared at the document long into the night, because she suddenly understood that the next decision she made could determine far more than the future of a business contract. It could determine whether Ethan's faith in people remained intact. The following week felt unusually heavy, as though the entire town was waiting for news it could not yet see. Claire spent her days moving between board meetings, legal reviews, and strategy sessions, trying to build support for an alternative plan that would protect communities like Cedar Ridge. Every proposal she presented faced resistance. Executives pointed to spreadsheets. Investors pointed to margins. Claire pointed to people. The gap between those viewpoints seemed wider every day. Meanwhile, Ethan continued living the only way he knew how. One morning, after dropping Lily off at school and watching her disappear into the familiar school hallway crowded with students and teachers, he stopped at a local diner for coffee before work. The waitress greeted him by name. An elderly customer struggled to reach a dropped cane near the counter. Before anyone else reacted, Ethan picked it up and returned it with a smile. It was a small gesture, quickly forgotten by everyone except the person who needed it. That afternoon, a rumor began circulating through the warehouse. Several workers had heard that major contract changes were coming. Anxiety spread quickly across the loading yard. Some employees complained. Others speculated. Ethan listened quietly, but refused to join the panic. Instead, he focused on helping newer workers complete orders before the end of the shift. One of them finally asked why he seemed so calm. Ethan smiled faintly. "Worrying about tomorrow does not help me finish today." The answer traveled farther than he realized. Later that evening, he found another utility notice waiting in the mailbox. The stack of bills at home was growing. Lily noticed him studying the envelope at the kitchen table. "Is everything okay?" she asked. Ethan looked up and offered the same reassuring smile he had given her countless times. "We will figure it out." He believed that, not because the situation was easy, but because responsibility required hope. Across town, Claire faced a different discovery. During a review of employee and community impact reports, she learned that Ethan had become an unofficial mentor to several younger workers at the warehouse. Multiple people credited him with helping them keep jobs, finish certifications, or navigate personal struggles. None of it appeared on performance reviews. None of it improved quarterly earnings. Yet the influence was undeniable. Claire realized something important. Ethan created value that could not be measured by traditional metrics. That realization gave her a new idea. 2 days later, she invited Ethan to meet at the community center near the church parking lot. Autumn sunlight filtered through the gym windows as volunteers prepared for an upcoming holiday program. Claire shared her thoughts carefully. She explained that community leadership, mentorship, and relationship building were exactly the qualities missing from many corporate initiatives. Ethan listened, uncertain where the conversation was leading. "I'm not a business executive," he said. Claire shook her head. "No, you are something much harder to find." The words lingered between them. For a moment, both seemed aware that their connection had grown beyond simple friendship. Yet before either could say more, Claire's phone rang. The call came from the board chairman. His voice was direct. The final vote on the expansion plan had been moved forward. Decisions would be made within days. After ending the call, Claire sat in silence. Ethan could see concern in her eyes immediately. Whatever was coming had arrived faster than expected. And as they looked at each other across the quiet community center, both sensed that the next few days would test not only their hopes for the future, but the strength of everything they had begun to build together. The decision came on a rainy Monday morning, and by noon it felt as though all the air had been pulled from Cedar Ridge. Claire sat at the long boardroom table listening as votes were counted one by one. Despite her arguments, despite weeks of negotiations, the original expansion plan passed by a narrow margin. The contract restructuring would move forward. Several smaller suppliers would lose business. Ethan's company was among them. The chairman called it a necessary adjustment. Investors called it efficiency. Claire stared at the final numbers on the screen and felt only disappointment. She had promised herself she would protect the people behind those numbers. Now she had failed. Miles away, Ethan learned the news from his supervisor. Workers gathered quietly in the warehouse break room as management explained the situation. Layoffs were not immediate, but reduced operations were unavoidable. More overtime would disappear. Future staffing remained uncertain. The room filled with frustration and worry. Ethan listened without interrupting. Then, as employees began discussing their own fears, he noticed a younger worker sitting alone in silence. The man had recently become a father and looked overwhelmed. Ethan spent the next 20 minutes encouraging him, helping him review possible options and reminding him that difficult seasons eventually pass. Even while facing his own uncertainty, his first instinct remained caring for someone else. That evening, rain tapped softly against the windshield of his pickup truck as he sat in the school parking lot waiting for Lily to finish an after-school activity. Through the windows, he could see children moving through the hallway carrying backpacks and art projects. He thought about bills waiting at home, about shrinking income, about responsibilities that never seemed to get lighter. Yet when Lily climbed into the truck smiling about a classroom achievement, he pushed every worry aside and celebrated with her. She deserved that version of her father. Across town, Claire struggled with a different kind of loss. For the first time since meeting Ethan, she questioned whether her presence in his life had done more harm than good. The company she led had become part of the very problem threatening his stability. Although she had fought against the decision, the outcome remained the same. Late that night, she drove to the community center near the church parking lot. The building was empty except for Ethan, who was finishing preparations for an upcoming holiday food drive. He looked surprised to see her. "You should be home," he said gently. Claire lowered her eyes. "I am sorry." Ethan understood immediately. The vote happened. She nodded. Silence followed, the kind that carries disappointment too deep for easy words. Claire expected anger. She expected blame. Instead, Ethan pulled out a chair and sat beside her. "You tried," he said. "It was not enough." "Maybe not." He paused. "But that does not mean it did not matter." The kindness in his response almost made the moment harder. Claire had failed, yet he was comforting her. For several minutes, neither spoke. Outside, rain drifted across the empty parking lot beneath streetlights. Finally, Claire confessed the fear she had been carrying. "I do not know if I belong in your world anymore." Ethan looked at her carefully. This was never about business plans. His voice remained calm. It was about who you choose to be when things go wrong. Yet even as the words left his mouth, another setback was already waiting. The next morning, Ethan opened his mailbox and found notice that additional hours at work would be eliminated immediately. The numbers no longer added up. Bills, groceries, and household expenses were beginning to outweigh what he could provide. For the first time, the future looked genuinely uncertain. And as Claire stared at a new proposal that had just landed on her desk, she realized there might be one final opportunity to change everything. The problem was that accepting it would require a risk neither of them had ever considered taking. The proposal waiting on Claire's desk was unlike anything the board had discussed before. It was not a charity initiative. It was not a public relations campaign. It was a community partnership program designed to strengthen relationships between corporations and the towns affected by their decisions. The project had existed on paper for years, but no one had ever found the right person to lead it. As Claire reviewed the details, one truth became impossible to ignore. Every skill the position required was something Ethan had already been doing for years without recognition, compensation, or title. He built trust. He solved problems. He brought people together. Most importantly, people believed him. 3 days later, Claire drove to Cedar Ridge and asked Ethan to meet her at the community center. Outside, families were gathering donations for the holiday food drive. Pickup trucks lined the church parking lot, while volunteers unloaded boxes of canned goods and winter coats. Ethan arrived straight from work, tired but smiling. Even now, after reduced hours and growing financial pressure, he had shown up to help. Claire watched him spend 10 minutes assisting an elderly volunteer before finally sitting down beside her. Then she handed him a folder. Ethan opened it slowly. Inside was a proposal for a new position, Director of Community Partnership Development. The role would oversee programs connecting local communities, schools, nonprofits, and businesses throughout the region. It carried a stable salary, long-term opportunities, and the chance to expand the kind of work he already loved. Ethan looked up immediately. "Claire, I cannot accept charity. She had expected that response. Good, she said softly. Because this is not charity. Then she showed him something else. Letters. Dozens of them. Recommendations from teachers, community leaders, volunteers, former hospital staff, local families, and even several workers from his warehouse. Claire had not written them. The community had. One by one, they described the same man. A father who stayed late to help. A volunteer who never asked for credit. A mentor who listened. A neighbor who showed up. Ethan turned the pages in silence. The room felt strangely still. You earned this before you ever met me, Claire said. I just happened to notice. For the first time in days, something shifted inside him. Not relief. Recognition. Across town, the board reviewed the proposal. Several executives remained skeptical until Claire presented the supporting evidence. Community engagement records. Volunteer growth numbers. Project outcomes. Mentorship testimonials. The results were undeniable. Ethan's influence had created measurable value everywhere he served. By the end of the meeting, the position was approved unanimously. Weeks later, life in Cedar Ridge began changing in quiet ways. The new role allowed Ethan to work directly with schools, nonprofits, and businesses throughout the region. He spent mornings visiting community programs and afternoons helping coordinate partnerships that protected jobs and expanded local opportunities. One afternoon, while visiting an elementary school, he watched Lily walk proudly through the school hallway, surrounded by friends. The smile on her face said more than words ever could. The bills that once covered the kitchen counter no longer controlled every decision. Stability had returned, not through luck, but through years of character finally being recognized. The greatest healing, however, happened elsewhere. One evening, after a community celebration held near the church parking lot, Ethan and Claire remained behind while volunteers folded chairs and children chased each other beneath strings of lights. The air carried the crisp scent of approaching winter. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Claire broke the silence. Do you know what changed everything for me? Ethan smiled. What? She looked toward the empty dance floor that had been set up for the event. The night you asked me to dance. Ethan laughed softly. I was not very good. That is not what I remember. Her eyes glistened slightly. Everyone else saw a wheelchair. You saw a person. Ethan sat quietly for a moment. Then he answered with the same honesty that had guided him from the beginning. Everyone wants to be seen. The simplicity of the words carried the weight of the entire journey. Claire reached for his hand. This time, neither looked away. Around them, the community they had both helped build continued packing up for the night. Families loaded supplies into trucks. Volunteers exchanged hugs and goodbyes. Ordinary people returning to ordinary lives. Yet something extraordinary had happened. A lonely woman had been seen. A struggling father had been recognized. And two people carrying old wounds had found healing not through wealth, status, or rescue, but through dignity, kindness, respect, and the courage to keep showing up for others. As Ethan drove home with Lily later that night, the familiar roads of Cedar Ridge stretched beneath the glow of streetlights. Home still looked the same. The mailbox stood beside the driveway. The porch light shined warmly through the darkness. But everything felt different, because sometimes the greatest second chance is not a miracle. Sometimes it is the moment the world finally sees the value that was there all along.